This is Office Talk with Annette Stepanian. Hi everyone, this is Annette, and we're here with some more Office Talk, where I answer some of the most frequently asked questions I get about law and business. So this week I wanted to talk about one of the most common questions that keeps coming up, and it's the question of what's right for me, an LLC or sole proprietorship. So some of you may have been operating as a sole proprietor and you've been considering becoming an LLC, or maybe you're just starting out and you're trying to decide which business structure is the best for you. So I'm going to talk to you about a few questions I think you need to ask yourself before you decide between a sole proprietorship or an LLC. But before we get started, you've got to do this disclaimer like I do all the time. This presentation is for your informational and educational purposes only. It's not considered legal advice and does not form an attorney-client relationship between the two of us. So if you have any specific questions about your individual circumstances, definitely reach out to an attorney authorized to practice law in your state. In case you're not familiar with what a sole proprietor is, let's start by defining the term. It's a business structure that is owned and run by a single natural person, and there is no legal distinction between the person, the owner, and the business. So if you think about it, there's you, there's the business, and as a sole proprietor, you are your business. Some of the pros to being a sole proprietor is that you control all of the business decisions, the profits, but a con is also that you are also responsible for any losses. Another pro is that it's pretty easy to get up and running. There's minimal paperwork involved, minimal filing fees. You might have to notify maybe a department in your state or your county or city to let them know that you are running a business. And there might be certain licenses or permits that you need to obtain depending on the line of work that you're in. But compared to filing an LLC or a corporation, it's very minimal. And the entity does not file separate taxes. The owner is the business, so they report their profit or loss on their personal tax returns. Some of the cons might be, depending on your perspective, that it's not a separate business entity. You and that business are one and the same, and so that it exposes you to personal liability. So you are responsible for any debts or claims or actions against the company. And your interest cannot be sold or transferred because people are not sold and bought in our society. So as a sole proprietor, you can't then sell your business to a potential investor. So what is an LLC? It's a business structure that combines the pass-through taxation of a partnership or sole proprietorship with the limited liability of a corporation. So it combines kind of the best of the sole proprietorship or partnership model with a corporation, and what you get is a limited liability company. So some of the pros, depending on your perspective, is that it is a separate entity. So there's you and then there's your business, and they exist independently of each other. And so as a result, your personal liability is limited to the amounts invested in the LLC. So any capital contribution that you make, that's the extent of your exposure to liability. Also, depending on your perspective or what you might think, some might argue that it creates some added credibility. So it might seem a little bit more official or professional when you have an LLC versus a sole proprietorship. Also, what's really cool about them is that it gives you the flexibility to choose on how you're going to be taxed. So you can either be taxed on your own personal tax returns like you would as a sole proprietor or a partnership, or as an entity as you would in a corporation. And so this is something you definitely want to talk to your accountant or CPA about, depending on your own personal circumstances, and determine what's the best way in which your LLC can be taxed. Also, it can be formed by either one member or multiple members. So if you're going to be going into business with a few folks, you have that flexibility of forming an LLC, as well as if you're just going to be a solo shop. The cons are that there are some filing requirements that you have to comply with. Now, the requirements are going to vary from state to state, and you want to look up and investigate what those requirements are for your state. A good place to start is your Secretary of State's website or any other corporate filing office that you have in your state. So there is some paperwork involved, some filings you need to register. And there are also some filing fees that are associated with that. So once that's done, once that your LLC is registered and approved by the state, there might also be some follow-up fees and taxes that you will incur, as well as some follow-up paperwork you need to file. So for example, in California, once you are registered as an LLC, you need to file what's called a Statement of Information with the Secretary of State. And that requirement to file that Statement of Information is a reoccurring requirement. So about every 2 years, around your anniversary date, you need to file this paperwork. Also, you are subject to LLC taxes and fees on a yearly basis. So again, these requirements vary widely from state to state. So definitely do the research in your state and take an assessment of what the administrative burdens and costs are going to be on your business. So here are some questions to determine whether an LLC or sole proprietorship is a best fit for you. The first question you want to ask is, what types of risks do you anticipate in this line of business? And how much protection from personal liability will you need? So for example, let's say you're in the line of business where you sell maybe food, or you sell some sort of product that exposes people to personal injury. I would consider that a high-risk business. And so probably forming an LLC is a better bet than a sole proprietorship. But if you're in a line of work where you don't really anticipate a lot of risk, maybe what you're doing is graphic design and there really isn't a lot of risk associated with that, then maybe a sole proprietor will work for you. Next question is, what are your personal assets that you want to protect? Take stock of what assets you own and determine, in light of the risk that my line of work is going to be exposing me to, are these personal assets in jeopardy? Next, how many owners will the business have? Remember, with a sole proprietorship, there's only one owner. So if you're going to be going into business with more than one person, so more than just yourself, then you would opt for an LLC or a partnership. What are your long-term plans for the business? Do you plan on selling it in the future? Remember, a sole proprietorship cannot be sold or transferred because that business and the person are one and the same. So if your long-term plans are to get investors, to maybe sell off the business, then forming an LLC is probably a better option. Do you have the resources to pay for the filing costs and taxes and to keep up with the filing requirements? So remember, it's a lot faster and cheaper to get a sole proprietorship up and running. And for some people, those filing costs and taxes and fees and just those administrative burdens might be too much, especially at the initial stages. So how should the business be taxed? Remember, this is something you want to discuss with your CPA or accountant, and it's going to vary based on your personal circumstances. But remember, with an LLC, you have an option of choosing how you're going to be taxed. So that might be appealing for some people in their own personal circumstances. So there you have it. I hope this has been super helpful and has given you the information you need to determine whether or not you should become a sole proprietor or an LLC. And if you have any other questions that you'd like addressed in a future office talk, feel free to submit them over at AnnetteStepanian.com/Q&A. Looking for more resources? Well, make sure to stop by my website over at AnnetteStepanian.com. There you'll find contract templates for your creative business, free legal webinars, upcoming courses, and loads of other goodness to help get your legal groove on. And while you're there, sign up for my free weekly newsletter where I share my best tips for laying the legal foundation for your business.